The 9,373rd meeting of the Security Council is called to order. The provisional agenda for this meeting is threats to international peace and security. The agenda is adopted. In accordance with Rule 39 of the Council's Provisional Rules of Procedure, I invite the following briefers to participate in this meeting: Mr. Bryce Green, independent journalist, and Mr. Jeffrey A. Brodsky, independent journalist. It is so decided. The Security Council will now begin its consideration of item 2 of the agenda. I now give the floor to the first briefer requested by the Russian Federation, Mr. Bryce Green.
Good afternoon. My name is Bryce Green. I am an organizer, a graduate student, a freelance media critic. My work has been published by Fairness and Accuracy in Reporting and has been republished in other outlets including Salon and the Monthly Review Online. I am also a United States citizen, and thus I bear the responsibility for the actions of my own government to the extent that I have the ability to influence them. But I appear here before the Security Council on my own behalf and represent no government or organization. It is media criticism work and studying the Ukraine war in general that brought me to investigate the Nord Stream attack and the international response to it. For a brief background, beginning around midnight on September 26th of last year, 2022, a series of leaks were detected along the route of the Nord Stream pipelines. Seismology reports indicated clearly that this was the result of deliberate sabotage and not an accident. For Western officials, experts, and the press, the culprit was clear: Russia. Numerous articles, government officials immediately pointed the finger at Russia. And what was their explanation as to why Russia would blow up its own pipeline? Well, even the New York Times acknowledged that, quote, "It is unclear why Moscow would seek to damage installations that cost Gazprom billions of dollars to build and maintain." But the press quickly fell into line with the motive that the attacks were just, quote, "a reminder from Moscow." According to Western officials, experts, and media, Russia attacked themselves to intimidate the West. Now, there are all sorts of problems with blaming Russia. For one, gas flows from Russia were a major point of leverage over Europe with respect to their support for Ukraine. Removing that leverage would, and has, severely harmed Russian strategic interests on that front. Also, Russia has already made statements urging Germany, then suffering from high energy prices, to end the sanctions against Nord Stream pipeline, saying that both lines could be opened. Importantly, we know now that the leading investigator from Sweden has told the press, quote, "Do I think it was Russia that blew up Nord Stream? I never thought so. It's not logical." The other problem with immediately blaming Russia was that another immediately apparent culprit, the United States, was almost completely ignored as a potential suspect. Why is that? As we shall see, the circumstantial case for U.S. complicity in the attacks is far stronger than the case for Russia. It has long been a U.S. and NATO strategy to prevent the integration between Western Europe and Russia. This was clear in the early post-war days. NATO's first Secretary General, Lord Hastings this May, made it clear that NATO's role as an organization was to, and I quote, "to keep the Russians out, the Americans in, and the Germans down." And that hasn't really changed over the last 80 years. Since the announcement of the second Nord Stream project, 3 successive U.S. administrations have done their utmost to stop the pipeline. The Obama, Trump, and Biden administrations all opposed it. Even people who plan out the global strategy for the military have taken these things into account. We see this in a study from the RAND Corporation in 2019. This study was looking at ways to overextend and unbalance Russia. Specifically, it looked at how best to exploit, quote, Russia's economic, political, and military vulnerabilities and anxieties. This RAND study prophetically recommended that the U.S. start providing more U.S. military equipment and advice to Ukraine in order to, quote, lead Russia to increase its direct involvement in the conflict and the price it pays for it, end quote. At the same time, it acknowledged that, quote, Russia might respond by mounting a new offensive and seizing more Ukrainian territory. We now know how that went. So clearly this is an important piece of literature with respect to understanding what's going on over there. More relevant to today's discussion, the study included a recommendation to reduce Russian natural gas exports and hinder pipeline expansions. The study noted that, quote, a first step would involve stopping Nord Stream 2, end quote, and that natural gas from the United States and Australia could provide a substitute. I should note that the study now, if you look at it online, has a warning that it's being misused by pro-Russian propagandists. However, I believe the words of the study speaks for themselves, as do the actions and words of U.S. officials. Recall, at the start of the Biden administration, the U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken told Congress that he was determined to do whatever he could to prevent Nord Stream 2 from being completed. Undersecretary of State Victoria Nuland told the press, if Russia invades one way or another, Nord Stream 2 will not go forward. In February, President Biden told reporters, if Russia invades, there will be no longer a Nord Stream 2. We will bring an end to it. I promise you, we will be able to do that. And after the attack, Blinken and Nuland celebrated the destruction of the pipelines, calling it a tremendous opportunity. Now, on February 8th of this year, veteran American journalist Seymour Hersh published a major article hosted on his Substack about who was responsible for the attacks. The story was based on anonymous sources with knowledge of the operation, one of whom was willing to go on the record. The story alleged that the pipeline was attacked on orders from Joe Biden and his National Security Council, originating with plans that predated the war. The story goes that U.S. Navy divers used the Baltops exercises in June 2022 as cover to lay explosives on the pipeline, and these explosives were later detonated 3 months later in September. Now, analysts within the open source intelligence community have pushed back, citing the differences in some of the vessels involved in Hersh's story and what's available on open source. But Hersh has responded to this criticism by pointing out that covert operations would likely not leave a trail that's searchable by the public. The White House, for their part, has called Hersh's story completely and utterly false, but given the interests of the U.S. in these pipeline explosions, these denials carry no information. There has been information collected by researchers, including the Swedish scholar Ola Thunander, which appeared to corroborate elements of Hersh's story. However, to my knowledge, these leads have yet to be seriously investigated by Western investigators. Now, a month after Hersh's article was published, a news story emerged in both the Western and in both the U.S. and European press, alleging that a, quote, pro-Ukrainian group was behind the attack. These reports, citing information ostensibly gathered in the ongoing German investigation, alleges that a small boat, the Andromeda, was a key part of the plot to bomb the pipelines. However, some investigators are still skeptical of the role it may have played. However, much like the U.S., Ukraine has ample reason to want the pipeline gone. In 2021, Ukrainian and Polish ministers published an article in Politico titled, Nord Stream 2 has damaged the West enough, time to put an end to it. Corroboration for the story came from the Washington Post, who published in addition to the ongoing Discord leaks story. According to U.S. intelligence intercepts of high-level Ukrainian communications, Zelensky had been advocating making bolder moves against Russia, including attacks on pipelines. We also learned that the U.S. was training Ukrainians in undersea operations similar to the ones that must have been carried out against the Nord Stream 2. According to numerous media reports in the Western press, Dutch intelligence agencies passed on information about a potential Ukrainian attack to the American Central Intelligence Agency, who then warned Germany about a potential attack. Thus, according to mainstream sources in the West, the U.S. had some degree of advanced knowledge of the attacks. One thorough investigation comes from journalist James Bamford, who reported that the U.S. is almost certain to know more about the attack than they're letting on, whether they or the Ukrainians committed the attack. And it's worth quoting some excerpts from his report. He says, quote, U.S. intelligence constantly monitors Russia and other countries in near real time from beneath the seas, including from under the Baltic, where arrays of acoustic sensors tethered to the seafloor would certainly have been able to pinpoint the exact time and location of these massive undersea explosions. Later on, he says, even more important, by analyzing the distinct engine sounds of the ships, submarines, and UUVs passing above in the days surrounding the sabotage, U.S. intelligence would have likely been able to, quote, fingerprint them and determine their nationality and exact identity. While the transponder on a ship can be switched off, rendering it invisible to satellites, as long as its engines are running, it can be detected by the U.S. Navy's little-known and highly secret worldwide integrated undersea surveillance system. Therefore, it is likely that the U.S. knows far more about what happened than they are letting on. To recap, the consensus among Western press and Western officials is that the United States or Ukraine was involved in the attack. And if Ukraine was involved in the attack, then it surely had U.S. acquiescence. Now, everyone here likely knows all of this, but given the U.S. power to veto any motion by the Security Council, it's likely not going to change anytime soon. So what will change that? And now I direct my comments to members of the Western press, people at CNN, the Washington Post, the New York Times, major American journals with the resources and the power to investigate the attack and demand responses from American officials. But there have been very few reports actually analyzing the situation and seriously weighing the evidence, and very few questions have been asked of the Biden administration. An article from the New York Times is emblematic of the general attitude of the country. They wrote, quote, a flurry of new findings and competing narratives has sown distrust among Western allies. Now, most critically, the Times acknowledges that, quote, it may be in no one's interest to reveal more. No one's interests? Is this serious? They've abdicated their role to hold power accountable. In conclusion, the West has let these revelations sink into the background. Despite the parlor game about whether or not it was American or Ukrainian divers who actually planted the charges, analysts and officials across the West seem to agree on key facts: that the attacks originated from the West, the Baltocs exercises were the staging ground for these attacks, and the U.S. knows a lot more than it is currently sharing. These facts and their implications need to be seriously understood and addressed by both the Security Council and the world's press. Western media is not seriously pressing for answers right now, and this distinction between the U.S. did it and Ukraine did it versions of the story are a distraction. It is a distinction without a difference. Both stories clearly indicate Western complicity and a conspiracy of silence at the absolute least. I urge the UN Security Council and especially Western press to utilize their considerable power and authority to shed some light on the situation and to hold accountable these individuals and organizations and nations that may be responsible for this act of terror. Thank you.
I thank Mr. Green for his briefing. I now give the floor to the second briefer requested by the Russian Federation, Mr. Jeffrey Brodsky.
Thank you very much. My name is Jeffrey Brodsky. I'm the only journalist to travel to all 4 blast sites of the Nord Stream 1 and 2 pipelines on the Baltic Sea. I've been investigating the Nord Stream sabotage since the day it occurred on September 26, 2022. I appear before the United Nations Security Council on my own behalf. I represent no government or organization in the testimony that I will deliver. The attack of the Nord Stream pipelines is likely the most severe act of eco-terrorism and the largest instance of industrial sabotage in history. Under the United Nations Charter, 2 of the functions and powers of the Security Council are, quote, to maintain international peace and security in accordance with the principles and purposes of the United Nations, and to investigate any dispute or situation which might lead to international friction, end quote. Bringing the perpetrator of the Nord Stream sabotage to international justice and compensating the harmed parties will advance international peace and security and reduce international friction, as well as further the aim of preventing future attacks on critical international infrastructure. I therefore appeal to the Security Council to execute its function and power under the UN Charter by conducting an impartial investigation into the Nord Stream sabotage. In late May, I participated in an independent investigation to all 4 blast sites of the Nord Stream 1 and 2 pipelines. Through the investigation, underwater drone images and videos and sonar images of the damaged pipelines were obtained. These images and videos had never been seen by the public before, and they offer unique insights into the amount of explosives used in the attack, the charges, the type of charges, and their placement. By analyzing the expedition's data, both military and civilian experts have drawn conclusions about how the pipelines were damaged. Notably, previous reports stating that over 500 kilograms of explosives were used at each blast site were proven inaccurate. Based on my reporting and the expedition's findings, the actual amount of explosives used ranged from 10 to 50 kilograms, likely leaning towards the lower end of this range. However, neither the data obtained on the expedition nor my investigative work has yet been able to conclusively attribute the sabotage to a specific nation state. Perhaps only the United Nations Security Council would be able to conclusively attribute the sabotage to a specific nation state. And to reach this objective, I am confident that many people around the world would welcome this body's assistance. The European Union, moreover, warned that, quote, any deliberate disruption of European energy infrastructure is utterly unacceptable and will be met with a robust and united response, end quote. Yet it remains unclear what actions the EU has taken to identify the perpetrator of the attack. Furthermore, it is widely known among members of this body and the general public that 3 countries, Germany, Denmark, and Sweden, have carried out investigations into the sabotage. Regrettably, none of these countries has yet disclosed the results of its investigations, despite 9 months having passed since the sabotage took place. I personally contacted the German, Danish, and Swedish investigators several times for their comment on my reporting and on the expedition's findings, but they have refused to offer any comment. It is unclear why these countries have not shared their findings with the public. The Baltic Sea is likely the most trafficked and monitored body, the most heavily trafficked and monitored body of water in the world. As one European parliamentarian told me, quote, do you think that a terrorist attack like this in international waters, in a sea that is observed by many different surveillance systems, that this could happen without anybody taking notice? That's hard to believe. It wasn't an attack on Mars. It was in the Baltic Sea, end quote. There is sufficient economic motivation for the 3 countries to release their findings as well. The pipelines cost over $23 billion to build, and their owners, operators, and stakeholders are from a number of countries. A good deal of the inflation that is currently hurting families and small businesses throughout Europe has been brought on by the lack of inexpensive natural gas. And Germany's industrial base has suffered particularly from the sabotage as manufacturing costs have risen. Nord Stream 1 alone could supply 58% of Germany's annual gas consumption, while, according to a study, quote, Germany's 3-decade-long surplus flipped into a deficit driven by the rise in gas prices, end quote. Furthermore, the ecological impact of the sabotage is likely tremendous. The explosions caused what could be the largest release of methane in history, a greenhouse gas more than 25 times as potent as carbon dioxide at trapping heat, according to the United Nations Environmental Protection Agency. Unfortunately, as of now, Germany, Denmark, and Sweden have shown no willingness to share the results of their investigations with the public. Of particular interest, Sweden was the first country to arrive at the crime scenes and conducted investigations, including the removal of debris and materials. In fact, Sweden investigators removed debris and materials from one of the crime scenes on at least 2 occasions. In October of 2022, when Expressen, a Swedish newspaper, published images and videos of the ruptures in one of the pipelines, media attention on the sabotage increased again. The Swedish investigators subsequently closed off the area for some days and did some more investigative work. It remains unclear why Swedish investigators took these actions and what information the debris and materials that they removed could provide about the sabotage. And even when, or if, these 3 countries release their findings, it doesn't appear as if Sweden in particular will tell the world who is responsible for the sabotage. The Swedish prosecutor, quote, has previously said that the main purpose of the Swedish preliminary investigation is to find out whether Sweden or Swedish infrastructure has been used for the attack and whether there are people who should be prosecuted for participation, end quote. That was an excerpt from an English translation of an article published in a European newspaper last May. The Nord Stream sabotage stands as one of the most significant acts of eco-terrorism and industrial sabotage in history. It also represents one of the most pressing geopolitical mysteries of our time. Is it sufficient to inform global citizens, the number of numerous businesses, and the many countries affected by the sabotage merely about whether Sweden or Swedish infrastructure has been used in the attack and whether there are people who should be prosecuted for participation? I think not. The nation state or nation states responsible for this sabotage must be held accountable for their violation of international law. The perpetrators must be identified, brought to justice, and the affected parties must be duly compensated. Many people worldwide have lost faith in national and international institutions. I hope that condemning this act of global terrorism and swiftly establishing a UN Security Council-led investigation into this enormous global crime can help restore some of this lost faith. The world is watching and expecting the UN Security Council to uncover the truth about the sabotage and share this truth publicly. Thank you very much.
I thank Mr. Brodsky for his briefing. I now give the floor to those council members who wish to make statements. I give the floor to the representative of the Russian Federation.
Господин председатель,
Mr. President,
благодарим американских
we
независимых
thank the
журналистов
independent
Брайса Грина
American
и Джеффри
journalists
Бродского
Bruce
за их
Green and
доклады,
Jeffrey Brodsky for
в
their
рамках которых они
briefings in
представили
which
Совету
they
Безопасности
presented the
объективные
Security
факты вокруг
Council
диверсии
with
на
objective
газопроводах
facts
«Северный
relating
поток»
to
в
the
Балтийском
sabotage of
море
the
в
Nord Stream
сентябре
gas
2022
pipelines in the Baltic Sea in September
Они
2022.
подтверждают нашу
They
версию о
confirm
том,
our
что
version of the
осуществить
events,
это
namely that
преступление
carrying out this
без
crime
прямого
without the
участия
direct
или хотя бы
participation or at the very least the
прикрытия
cover
государственного
of a state
было
entity
попросту
would have
невозможно.
been simply impossible.
Данная тема уже не первый
This
месяц. С нашей подачи
topic
находится в
has
фокусе
been
внимания
the
Совета
focus of the Security
Безопасности.
Council's attention for several
Отмечаем,
months now at our
что в каком бы
behest. We
формате
note
она
that
ни
no matter
обсуждалась в
what
Совете
format
Безопасности,
it is
какими
discussed
бы
in
ни
the Security
были
Council and
позиции
whatever the
делегаций
positions of
по
delegations may
предложенному
be
нами проекту
on the
резолюции,
draft resolution we
практически
propose,
все члены
nearly all the
Совета
members of the
неизменно
Council
осуждали
have
это
consistently
преступление
condemned this
и
crime
отмечали
and
важность
noted the importance of
установления истинной
establishing the truth and identifying those responsible.
При этом западные коллеги
At the same
пытались
time,
убедить
Western
Совет,
colleagues
что
tried to
добавленной
convince the
стоимости
Council that there
международных
was
усилий
no
для
added
окончания
value in
национальных
international
следственных
efforts
действий,
until the
осуществляемых
completion
Берлином,
of national
Копенгагеном и
investigations
Стокгольмом, нет.
carried out by Berlin,
И настойчиво
Copenhagen, and
призывали
Stockholm. They
дождаться их
persistently
окончания.
urged to wait until those
Что ж,
investigations were
прошло
completed.
уже
Well, it has
без
now
малого
been
10 месяцев с момента
almost 10
диверсии
months since
и
the
4 с момента
sabotage
голосования
and
по
4
нашему
months
проекту
since the vote
резолюции.
on our draft resolution.
Никакой информации о ходе расследования
There
у
has
Совета
been no
Безопасности
information
и в целом
provided to the
международному
Security Council
сообществу не
and the
было до
international
вчерашнего дня.
community until yesterday.
Немецкие, датские и шведские власти
German,
упорно
Danish, and
не
Swedish
представляли
authorities stubbornly
никакой
refused to
вразумительной
provide
реакции на
any
наши многочисленные
intelligible
запросы и
response to our
обращения,
numerous
ни на
requests
направленные
and
в октябре
appeals. They did not
2022
provide
года
one to the
послание
message
председателя
sent in
правительства
October
Российской
22 by the
Федерации
Prime Minister of the Russian
о
Federation,
необходимости
Mishustin, on the
проведения
need to
всестороннего
conduct a
расследования
comprehensive
произошедшего с
investigation of the
участием
incident with
представителей
the
российских
participation of
властей,
representatives of
с
Russian
участием представителей российских властей и компании
authorities
«Газпром»,
and the Gazprom
ни на
company,
многочисленные ноты российских заградучреждений
nor
на
to
этот
the
счет.
numerous notes sent by Russian missions abroad in this
Мы
regard.
неоднократно обращали
We have
внимание Совета
repeatedly
на то, что
drawn the
вся их
Council's
реакция
attention to the
сводилась к
fact that their
дежурным
entire
отпискам
response
с
amounted
отказом
to
от
routine,
взаимодействия
formal
под предельно
non-answers with a
нелепыми и
refusal to
надуманными
cooperate
предлогами.
under extremely ludicrous and
Члены
far-fetched
Совета имели
pretexts.
возможность своими
Members of the
глазами
Council had the
убедиться в этом,
opportunity to see this for
получив копии
themselves
нашей переписки
when
с
they received
властями
copies
Дании,
of our
Швеции и
correspondence with the
ФРГ,
authorities of Denmark,
которые
Sweden,
мы
and Germany,
распространили в
which we
Совете
circulated in the
письма
Council in March as letters S 2023-193
и
and S
2023-223.
2023-223.
По всей видимости, в Германии, Дании и
It
Швеции
appears that
вследствие
Germany,
наших усилий
Denmark,
начали
and Sweden,
осознавать,
as a
что они
result
не
of our
просто
efforts, have begun
игнорируют
to
запросы
realize that they are
Российской
not
Федерации,
just
но и,
ignoring
по
the
сути,
requests of the
пренебрегают
Russian
мнением
Federation,
Совета
but are essentially
Безопасности ООН,
defying the
среди членов
opinion of the
которого,
UN
как
Security
четко показали
Council, among
наши
whose
дискуссии за закрытыми
members,
дверями,
as our discussions
растет
between
непонимание
closed
и
doors have clearly shown, there is
из-за отсутствия
growing
какой-либо
confusion
информации о
and
ходе
dissatisfaction
национального
due to the
расследования.
absence of any information
В
on the
итоге,
progress
получив
of national
очередную желтую
investigations.
карточку от большинства членов
As a
Совета,
result,
в
after
Берлине,
receiving yet another
Копенгагене и
yellow card
Стокгольме
from the majority of council
решили
members,
подготовить
Berlin, Copenhagen, and
распространенное вчера
Stockholm
коллективное
decided to
письмо.
prepare the collective letter that
К
was
сожалению,
disseminated
оно также
yesterday.
очень напоминает
Unfortunately,
отписку и
it
не
is
может
also
заменить
very
полноценный
reminiscent of a
брифинг для
non-answer
членов
and
Совета,
cannot
в
replace
рамках
a
которого мы могли бы
full-fledged
задать им
briefing by
вопросы,
them to the members of the
которых у
council,
нас накопилось
where we
очень
could
много.
ask them questions of which a great deal have
Мало
piled
того,
up.
Мало того,
Moreover,
что в письме вновь повторяется ложный
not
тезис о
only
том, что
does
Россия
this letter
якобы была
repeat the false
проинформирована
assertion
о
that
ходе
Russia was
расследования,
allegedly informed
так
about the
еще и
progress of the
формулировки,
investigations,
подобранные таким
the
образом,
choice of
что власти
wording
Германии,
also
Дании и
indicates
Швеции
that the authorities of
заведомо
Germany, Denmark, and
пытаются
Sweden are
подготовить членов
deliberately
Совета
trying
Безопасности
to
к тому, что не
prepare
стоит ждать
the
таких
members of
расследований,
the
каких
council not to
конкретных
expect any
результатов.
concrete results from these
Да и
investigations.
когда они будут завершены,
And in any
сказать
case, it is
невозможно.
impossible to say when they will be completed.
Еще более показательна
Even
формулировка
more
из части,
telling
посвященной
is
расследованию
the language
Швеции.
from the part
Цитирую.
devoted to the Swedish
Дальнейшее
investigation. I
расследование
quote,
покажет,
the ongoing
может ли
investigation will
кто-то
show
быть
whether anyone can be
заподозрен в совершении
suspected
этого
of
преступления и
and
после
later
этого
prosecuted
привлечен к
for
ответственности
this
за него.
crime.
Конец цитаты. Из этой цитаты
End of
следует,
quote.
что
It
шведские
follows from
власти
this
с самого
quote
начала
that
не
Swedish
ставят перед собой
authorities
цель
have never
установления
set
вины.
the goal of identifying the
Разумеется, ни о
perpetrators from the
какой
very
неотвратимости
beginning.
наказания в этих обстоятельствах речи не идет.
Of course, there's no question of
Это
the
особенно
inevitability of
показательно
punishment
с
in this
учетом того,
context,
что
and this is particularly striking
именно шведы,
given
как
that it was
сегодня было
Sweden, as
сказано
was
нашим
said
докладчикам,
today
первыми
by our
прибыли на
briefers,
место
were the
происшествия.
first to be at the scene of the crime.
Показательные бездействия властей
The
европейских государств
demonstrative
можно
inaction
объяснить
of
лишь
European
одним –
authorities
попытками
can be
закинуть
explained by
время,
only
чтобы
one thing,
замести
attempts to
следы
stall for
истинных
time in order to
виновников
cover up
преступления.
the real
Об
perpetrators of
этом
the crime.
красноречиво говорит и очевидно скоординированная
The
дезинформационная кампания
evidently
западных СМИ,
coordinated campaign
в
in
рамках
Western
которой
media
раскручиваются совершенно
eloquently
абсурдные версии
testifies to this
произошедшего.
in attempting to popularize
Если раньше
absurd
некоторые
versions
журналисты
of the
активно пытались
events,
утверждать, что
while earlier
Россия
some journalists
сама
actively tried
взорвала
to claim that it was
функционирующий в ее
Russia
интересах
itself that blew
газопровод,
up the pipeline, a
то недавно
pipeline that was
доминирующей
functioning
стала
in its
еще одна
interests.
выдумка.
Another fiction has
Мол, за
recently come to
атакой стояли
dominate,
некие
namely the
проукраинские
claim that some
диверсанты, которые при
pro-Ukrainian
этом якобы
saboteurs
никак
were
не
behind
связаны
the
с
attack,
киевским
yet
режимом.
they allegedly had nothing to do with the Kiev
При этом
regime at the same
показательно, что в
time.
недавнем интервью газете
It is
The
telling,
Times
meanwhile, that
глава
in a
украинской
recent
разведки
interview
Кирилл
with The
Буданов в ответ
Times,
на
the
прямой
head of
вопрос о
Ukrainian
причастности
intelligence,
властей
Kirill
Украины к
Budanov, in
подобному
response to a
газопроводу
direct question about the
и другим
involvement of
терактам,
Ukrainian
сказал
authorities
буквально
in
следующее,
the
цитата:
pipeline incident and
«Мы
other terrorist
занимаемся этим
attacks,
как раз сейчас,
said
и нам
literally,
это
we are
нравится.
doing
Мы
this right
гордимся, что
now.
действуем таким
We
образом
use
и
direct
не
actions, we use
побоимся
them,
делать
and we
это
love
повсюду
them.
в
We're
мире
proud of
против
using them, and
кого
we're
бы то
not
ни было».
afraid of using them
Конец цитаты.
anywhere in this world against
Скажем
whoever.
честно,
End of
бравада
quote.
главарей киевского
Let's be
режима не
honest, the
вызывает у
bravado
нас
of
доверия.
the
Они
ringleaders in
готовы
Kiev does
приписать
not
себе
inspire
любые заслуги,
confidence.
лишь бы
They are prepared
сместить
to take
акцент с
credit
провалов
for
и
any
происхождения на
accomplishments
фронте
just to shift
и
the focus from their
вопиющих нарушений прав
failures
человека внутри
on the
Украины,
front and flagrant violations of
происходящих в
human rights in the
контексте укрепления
country
диктатуры Зеленского.
taking place in the context
Мы
of
также
the
помним о
strengthening
публикации
of
весьма
Zelensky's
правдоподобной версии
dictatorship.
событий
We also
американским
recall the
журналистом
publication of a
расследователем
highly plausible
расследователем
version of events
Симором
by the
Херш.
American investigative journalist
Он
Seymour
же со
Hersh.
ссылкой на достоверные
Referencing
источники
reliable
позднее приводил
sources, he
информацию
later
о том,
cited
что по
information
итогам
that
мартовской встречи
following the March
президента
meeting
США Джо
between
Байдена и канцлера
U.S.
ФРГ
President
Олафа Шольца
Joe Biden and German
американские Британской и
Chancellor
немецкой
Olaf
разведке
Scholz,
было
American and
поручено
German
подготовить и
intelligence was
продвигать
instructed to
альтернативную
prepare and
версию для
promote
СМИ
an
о том,
alternative
кто
version for the
взорвал
media
Северный
about who
поток.
blew up the Nord
И
Stream.
сразу же после этого в западных
Immediately
СМИ,
after
как грибы
this,
после дождя, начали плодиться
publications
публикации
began to
о
spring
том, что
up
уничтожить Северные
in
потоки
the Western
якобы
media
могла
en masse,
небольшая
claiming
группа
that
чуть
the
ли не
destruction
дилетантов,
of the Nord
не
Stream could have been
обладающих ни
perpetrated
серьезной
by a
экспертизой, ни
small group of
значительными
near
ресурсами,
amateurs who had
и за которыми
neither
не стоит никакое государство.
serious resources
И это при том, что многочисленные
nor
независимые эксперты, в том числе
state backing, and this is despite the fact that numerous independent experts, including those who spoke before the council, made it clear that non-experts could not have carried out an operation to blow up gas pipelines that were protected with the latest technology. In any case, it is not something that the coastal states in this region, at the very least, which is considered one of the most closely monitored, would have been unaware of. And how do you square this with the repeated threats against the Nord Stream from U.S. top leadership? These have sounded more than once. However, as soon as inconvenient facts came to light, Americans and their European allies began to interfere with an international investigation in every way possible. Moreover, unlike many other UN member states, they were not interested in investigative efforts under the auspices of the Secretary General. They stand to gain much more in a situation where Western states enjoy complete carte blanche and absolute impunity within the framework of a rules-based order imposed on the whole world and which has nothing to do with international law. Mr. President, we want to stress that any efforts to cover up the sabotage in the Baltic Sea are doomed to fail. We expect the authorities of Germany, Denmark, and Sweden to take concrete steps to conduct an objective and transparent investigation into all the circumstances of the incident with the obligatory participation of Russian investigative authorities and other interested parties. In the meantime, we reserve the right to conduct our own investigation. In this context, we took note of the statement in the letter from the authorities of Germany, Denmark, and Sweden that access to the crime scene is allegedly open. We presume that in this case, our investigative authorities can independently examine the crime scene at any time as part of the criminal proceedings initiated by the Prosecutor General's Office of the Russian Federation pursuant to the Article on Acts of International Terrorism. The Russian Federation will continue raising the issue of the Nord Stream sabotage in the Council until the perpetrators are identified and held accountable. The letter mentioned today leaves little doubt that this is not a goal that the three national investigations seek to accomplish. We will use all the means at our disposal to make sure that this goal is in fact achieved. We trust that our constructively minded colleagues in the Security Council and other members of the international community will support our efforts, and we are open to cooperation in this area. The Council must make it clear that crimes against cross-border pipeline infrastructure, which pose a direct threat to international peace and security, will not go unpunished. Only then can we prevent the recurrence of such crimes to which any state could fall victim. Thank you.
I thank the representative of the Russian Federation for their statement, and I give the floor to the representative of Ecuador.
Señor Presidente,
Mr. President,
escuché
I
con
listened
atención
closely
a los ponentes.
to the briefers.
Por otro lado,
I also
también leí con
read
atención
attentively
la misiva
the
conjunta
joint
de
letter
Suecia,
sent by
Alemania y
Sweden, Germany, and
Dinamarca,
Denmark,
contenida en el
contained in
documento
document S/2023/517
S-2023-517 de 10 de julio
and
de
dated July
2023
2023.
y su anexo,
I also read its annex.
con el cual
Through
proveen
these
información
documents,
de
these three
cada una de las
countries each
investigaciones
provide
nacionales
separate information
por separado.
regarding their national
De esta
investigations.
información
From this
se desprende
information,
el
we
carácter
can glean
complejo
that
de las
these
investigaciones
investigations are complex
que
in
involucran
nature
aspectos
and that they
técnicos,
involve
científicos
technical, scientific, and
logísticos, entre
logistical
otros.
aspects, among others.
Está claro
It is clear
que las
that
explosiones
the explosions
ocurridas
which
en los
occurred
gasoductos
in the
submarinos
submarine
Nord Stream
pipelines
1
Nord
y
Stream
2
1 and 2
en el mar
in the
Báltico
Baltic Sea
resultaron de
were
actos
the
de
result
sabotaje
of acts of
y
sabotage.
reiteramos que nada
And we
justifica
reiterate that
ataques
nothing
contra
justifies attacks
infraestructuras
against
civil esencial.
essential civilian
incluso
infrastructure, including energy infrastructure.
Además de poner en riesgo la
In addition
navegación
to
segura
jeopardizing
marítima
safe
y aérea,
maritime and air
esos actos
navigation,
significaron
these
una
acts
fuente
produced an
incalculable de
incalculable source of
contaminación de la vida
pollution,
marítima
endangering
local,
local marine
con posibles
life,
consecuencias
and
climáticas
that
devastadoras.
has
Al haber
possibly
liberado
devastating
cientos de
climate
millones de metros
consequences.
cúbicos
And these
de gas en
consequences
la
were
atmósfera.
unleashed when the explosions
Se debe
released
evitar que actos como
hundreds
este,
of millions
en
of
medio
cubic
de una
meters of gas
situación
into the
geopolítica
atmosphere. We must
mundial
avoid a situation
sumamente
whereby
compleja,
acts such as this, in the
exacerben
midst of a
las tensiones
highly complex
de lado y
geopolitical
lado,
situation,
o que sean
exacerbate
detonantes
tensions
de
from left to
acciones
right,
de
or trigger
consecuencias
actions with
imprevisibles.
unpredictable consequences.
Por todo
In
lo
light
anterior,
of all of
el
the
Ecuador
above,
condenó
Ecuador
en varias
on several
oportunidades
occasions
esos
has
actos
condemned
y
these
sigue llamando a
acts
todos los
and
estados de
continues to
esta
call upon
organización
all states of
a
this
mostrar la mayor
organization to
prudencia y la
exercise the
máxima
utmost
contención.
caution and restraint.
Además,
Moreover,
seguiremos
we will
guiados
continue to be
por la
guided
exposición
by the
informativa
briefing
del 21 de
on the
febrero pasado
21st of February
por la Secretaría
by
General Adjunta,
Undersecretary General
Secretaria General Adjunta
Rosemary DiCarlo.
Quien llamó a
In that
evitar
briefing,
las
she called for the
especulaciones
avoidance of
y cualquier
speculations and of
acusación
any
infundada
baseless accusation
que pueda escalar las tensiones
which
en la
could
región
escalate
e
tensions in the
inhibir
region and
la búsqueda de la
stymie
verdad.
the quest for truth.
En este sentido,
As
nuestra
such,
delegación
our
que en marzo
delegation
pasado
last March
ya expresó su respaldo
already
para las
expressed its support
investigaciones en
for
curso
the
de
investigations
Dinamarca,
underway
Suecia y Alemania,
in Denmark,
alienta
Sweden, and
a
Germany.
que
We
éstas
now
sigan
encourage these
avanzando con el
investigations to
propósito de que
continue
se
with the aim
determine
of
lo
determining
sucedido.
what happened.
Muchas gracias.
I thank you.
I thank the representative of Ecuador for their statement, and I give the floor to the representative of France.
Monsieur le Président,
Mr. President,
c'est la troisième
it is the
fois
third time
en moins d'un
in
mois
less than a month
que la Russie
that
sollicite la
Russia
tenue
has
d'une
called for
réunion
a
sur ce
discussion
sujet
on this
sans
matter.
qu'aucun
However,
nouveau développement
no
ne vienne
new development has
justifier
occurred which
cela.
would justify
On ne
that.
peut par ailleurs pas
Moreover,
s'empêcher
we
de relever la
are
contradiction entre la vive
justified
préoccupation
in noting that there is a
qu'exprime la
contradiction
Fédération de
between
Russie quant à
Russia's deep
l'atteinte qui
concern
aurait été
following
faite
the attack
envers une
that was
infrastructure critique
perpetrated against
européenne
critical European
et son
infrastructure
comportement qui
and its
consiste
behavior which
jour après
involves
jour
day
à
after
frapper
day
les
striking
infrastructures civiles essentielles de
essential
l'Ukraine.
civilian infrastructure
Nous
in
avons ainsi des raisons de
Ukraine.
douter du
As
bien
such, we
fondé
have
de la
reasons
démarche
to
russe.
doubt the
Une fois
validity of
encore,
the
il est
Russian
clair
approach. Once again,
que
it
la
is
Russie
clear
cherche
that
à
Russia is
détourner
seeking to
l'attention de ce
divert the
Conseil et de
attention
la
of this
communauté
Council and that of the
internationale.
international community.
La France a clairement
France
marqué sa
clearly expressed
préoccupation
its
après les
concern
deux
following
explosions
the
sous-marines
two
qui ont frappé
underwater
les
explosions
gazoducs
which
Nord Stream
struck
1
the
et
Nord
2
Stream
en
1
mer
and 2
Baltique le
gas
26 septembre
pipelines in the
dernier.
Baltic Sea on the 26th of
C'est sous
September.
votre
It was
présidence
under
que le
our
Conseil de
presidency
sécurité
that
s'est
this
réuni le
Security
30
Council
septembre
met
dernier
on the
sur ce
30th
même
of
sujet.
September to discuss that
Notre
very matter.
évaluation
Our
demeure inchangée. Ces
assessment
événements
remains
sont graves
unchanged. These
et ils
events
doivent être
are
pris au sérieux.
gravely serious and must be taken
Des
seriously.
enquêtes ont été diligentées
Inquiries
par
have been
l'Allemagne,
launched
par
by
le
Germany,
Danemark et par la
Denmark, and
Suède.
Sweden.
Au vu de la
In
nature
view
et du
of
caractère sans
the
précédent
unprecedented
des actes de
nature and
sabotage qui ont
character
été
of the
commis,
sabotage
on
acts which
comprend
were
que ces procédures
perpetrated, we
soient
can
complexes
understand
et
that
puissent
these
prendre du
procedures
temps.
are complex and that they
Nous
may
n'avons
take time.
aucune
We have
raison de
no reason
douter
to
du
doubt the
sérieux de
seriousness
celle-ci.
of those
Les
inquiries.
enquêtes doivent aller à leur
These
terme.
inquiries must
Je
be allowed to
tiens
come to
à
fruition.
remercier ces
I wish
trois
to
pays
thank these three
pour la
countries
lettre
for
qu'ils ont
the
adressée
letter
hier
that they
conjointement à la
sent
présidence de
jointly
ce
yesterday
Conseil
to the
et qui
presidency
fait
of
le
this
point
council,
sur
which
ces
provides
enquêtes.
an update on
Il est
these
peut-être
inquiries. It
utile
is perhaps
de
useful
rappeler à la
to
Russie
remind
que
Russia
les enquêtes en
that
cours sont
the
conduites
inquiries
conformément
underway are
aux
being
principes
conducted in
fondamentaux de
accordance with
l'état
the
de droit.
fundamental principles of the rule of
Les
law.
autorités judiciaires allemandes,
German,
suédoises et
Swedish,
danoises
and Danish
sont
judicial
indépendantes,
authorities are
je répète bien
independent.
indépendantes,
I state once again,
et les instructions
independent,
qu'elles conduisent
and the
ne sauraient faire
investigations that they
l'objet
are conducting
d'interférences
cannot be
politiques. Je
subject
vous
to
remercie.
political interference. I thank you.
I thank the representative of France for their statement, and I give the floor to the representative of Ghana.
Mr. President, I thank the briefers for their respective views on this agenda item. We also take note of the joint letter submitted by Denmark, Germany, and Sweden on developments related to their respective ongoing national investigations on the sabotage of the Nord Stream pipeline. Ghana continues to be deeply concerned about the sabotage against the Nord Stream 1 and 2 gas pipelines last September, given the impacts on the marine environment and also the potential economic, humanitarian, and security risks that arise from the destruction of such critical infrastructure of a transboundary nature. We therefore maintain our support for the ongoing national investigations by the countries of interest, particularly Denmark and Sweden, in whose exclusive economic zones the incident occurred, as well as Germany. In view of the sustained interest of the international community on the matter, we encourage frequent updates and readily available information on the status of investigations to bring clarity on the facts and help to determine the necessity or otherwise of an international investigative process. Pending the conclusion of the national investigations, we urge cooperation among all relevant stakeholders, including the operators of the pipeline, with the objective of arriving at a single narrative on the circumstances resulting in the unfortunate incident. I wish to end by reiterating our previous appeals to all concerned to exercise restraint against unilateral actions that may be detrimental to peace. I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of Ghana for their statement, and I give the floor to the representative of Brazil.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, dear colleagues, I thank the briefers for their views and assessments. I also take note of the letter circulated yesterday by Denmark, Germany, and Sweden. Immediately after the Nord Stream 1 and 2 gas pipeline explosions last September, Brazil, as well as other Council members, expressed deep concern about what was clearly a threat to international peace and security. We consider it essential to identify those responsible and hold them accountable for their actions. For this reason, last March, we supported a proposal for the launching of an international investigation coordinated by the United Nations in support of efforts by national authorities. We are aware that Denmark, Germany, and Sweden are conducting investigations on the incident. We trust in their objectivity and await the disclosure of information that may shed light on this act of sabotage, which resulted in immense economic losses and environmental damage. Brazil underscores the importance that the conclusions of the investigations in progress are disclosed as soon as possible. The consequences of the incident cause concern to the international community, especially in view of the proliferation by the media of narratives and unconfirmed versions of the events. We understand the need for secrecy and time for the proper conduct of the procedures. However, the lack of responses, almost 10 months after the explosions, has produced anxieties and deepened tensions even among members of this Council. We encourage increased cooperation between states directly affected and additional efforts to prevent misinformation and ensure that the results of investigations are known soon with due transparency. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of Brazil for their statement, and I give the floor to the representative of Mozambique.
Mr. President, Mozambique wishes to thank the briefers, Mr. Bryce Green and Mr. Jeffrey Brodsky, for their important and insightful updates. Almost a year has gone by since this grave incident occurred in the Baltic Sea in September 2022. Despite the prevailing understanding that this was indeed an act of sabotage and that a serious violation of international law had occurred, we are still searching for answers that can be conducive to the determination of the truth. By principle and policy, Mozambique does not condone with a deliberate destruction and weaponization of critical and transnational infrastructures, such as the Nord Stream pipeline. We hold this view within the spirit that led to the adoption of Security Council Resolution 2341 of 2017 that aims to protecting critical infrastructures of such attacks. We are aware of the ongoing investigations into the incident by competent authorities in 3 national jurisdictions of Germany, Sweden, and Denmark. We also take note of their commitment to a fair and impartial process to establish the truth surrounding what appears to be a deliberate act of sabotage. As the primary organ responsible for international peace and security, it is legitimate that the Security Council should be kept abreast of the results of the tri-national investigations, preliminary or otherwise. An infrastructure of transnational reach and international ownership structure, the search for an answer is fair and warranted. As a country that is investing heavily in a regulated and orderly energy infrastructure for its development and the development of the region as a whole, Mozambique supports the speedy conclusion of objective, impartial, and professional investigations into the incident. I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of Mozambique for their statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Switzerland.
Monsieur le Président, j'ai pris
Mr.
note
President,
des
I have
remarques de
taken note
M.
of the
Green
remarks
et
made
de
by
M.
Mr. Green
Brodsky.
and Mr. Brodsky.
Comme nous l'avons
As
montré
we
dans le
have
passé,
stated in
nous
the
sommes
past, we are
préoccupés par les
concerned
actes de
by the
sabotage
alleged acts
présumés
of
contre les
sabotage
gazoducs Nord Stream 1
perpetrated
et 2
against the Nord
qui ont
Stream 1 and
entraîné
2
des
gas
fuites de
pipelines.
gaz
These prompted
inquiétantes en
worrying gas
septembre
leaks
dernier.
last September.
Je réitère la
I
condamnation
reiterate
de la Suisse de
Switzerland's
tout acte de
condemnation of all
sabotage
acts of
contre les
sabotage
infrastructures
against
critiques,
critical
y
infrastructure,
inclut
including
les infrastructures
energy
énergétiques et leurs
infrastructure and the
conséquences
consequences
pour
they have
l'approvisionnement de la
on the
population,
people's energy
l'économie
supply,
et
on the
l'environnement.
economy and the environment.
Nous saluons les
We
informations
welcome the
fournies dans la
information
lettre
provided
conjointe
in
du
the joint
Danemark,
letter
de
from
l'Allemagne
Denmark,
et de la
Germany
Suède
and
du
Sweden
10 juillet.
dated the
Comme
10th of
indiqué dans
July.
cette
As
lettre,
indicated
les
in
enquêtes
that letter,
nationales respectives continuent
respective
d'être
national
menées pour
inquiries
faire la
continue
lumière
to be
sur les
conducted
faits.
in order to shed
Nous
light on
restons
the
dans
facts.
l'attente de
We
leurs
continue to
conclusions.
await their
Je vous remercie.
conclusions. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Switzerland for their statement, and I give the floor to the representative of Gabon.
Je vous remercie, Monsieur
I
le
thank you,
Président.
Mr. President.
Je remercie également l'ensemble des intervenants pour leurs exposés et leurs analyses. Il y a presque 10 mois, des explosions sous-marines ont endommagé les gazoducs Nord Stream 1 et 2 en mer Baltique. Les fuites de méthane qui en résultaient ont eu un impact indéniable sur la faune, la flore et le milieu marin. Le Gabon prend note des investigations menées par l'Allemagne, le Danemark et la Suède. Le 27 juin 2023, nous avions déjà examiné cette question. Nous sommes à nouveau réunis aujourd'hui pour en débattre. Mon pays réitère sa profonde préoccupation suite aux attaques perpétrées sur les infrastructures civiles et appelle les belligérants au respect des instruments juridiques internationaux
international legal instruments that are relevant in this field and which protect civilians and civilian infrastructure against any armed attack. My country reaffirms its appeal for dialogue and coordination to find a political and diplomatic solution to this crisis. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Gabon for their statement, and I give the floor to the representative of Malta.
Thank you, President. Malta reiterates its strong condemnation of the act of sabotage targeting the Nord Stream 1 and 2 pipelines that occurred last September. Such actions pose a serious threat to energy security and regional stability. Likewise, we reiterate our firm stance against any form of disruption to critical energy infrastructure. Furthermore, the subsequent leaks pose a significant risk to the countries concerned and jeopardized an important pathway for transporting a vital energy resource. They also added additional pressure on developing countries and global energy markets, which were already negatively impacted by Russia's aggression against Ukraine. This incident serves as a reminder of the vulnerability of essential energy infrastructure. President, as we have stated before, we support and trust the ongoing investigations by Denmark, Germany, and Sweden. We have no doubt that these investigations will disclose and establish the truth behind this deliberate act. It is crucial to ensure the completion of these national processes without any external interference. We have full confidence in their impartiality and credibility. As we all know, investigations of this magnitude take time. Persistent claims that 9 months should have been enough to investigate and establish the truth on this matter are unfounded. Such insinuations do not move us any closer to the truth and only serve to generate unfounded suspicions and distrust among states. To conclude, we reiterate our convinced position that introducing further investigations at this juncture will seriously risk impeding progress and potentially have counterproductive effects on the ongoing process. I thank you, President.
I thank the representative of Malta for their statements, and I give the floor to the representative of the United Arab Emirates.
Mr. President, the United Arab Emirates reaffirms its unqualified condemnation of last September's acts of sabotage which targeted the Nord Stream 1 and 2 pipelines in the Baltic Sea. Such attacks threaten international security, stability, and prosperity. They are dangerously disruptive to global energy markets, which depend upon international cooperation and cause significant ecological damage. They merit this Council's sober attention and the international community's concern. Furthermore, we underscore our respect and support for the ongoing national investigations by the competent authorities in all relevant countries, and we continue to monitor their progress. We also note the heightened international interest in this issue and recognize the legitimate equities at stake, and therefore encourage cooperation between all relevant countries and entities. In that vein, we welcome the updates on the status of the investigations offered to this Council by Denmark, Germany, and Sweden through their joint letters of 21 February and 10 July 2023, which were sent to the President of the Security Council. We appreciate the increased information sharing reflected in yesterday's letter. As investigations are still ongoing, it is vital to avoid prejudging their outcomes. We await their swift conclusion, the transparent communication of their findings, and timely updates as appropriate. To conclude, the UAE takes attacks against cross-border critical infrastructure extremely seriously. They must never be tolerated, and we expect to see those responsible held to account. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of the UAE for their statement, and I give the floor to the representative of Albania.
Thank you, Mr. President. The quick version of our statement today would have been a reference to our last statement on this issue a week or so ago, since there is nothing new on the matter. Being here, I would like to make the following points. First, we have said it many times and we reiterate it again. We have been and are deeply concerned by an apparent act of sabotage on the pipelines Nord Stream 1 and 2 in the exclusive economic zones of Denmark and Sweden in the Baltic Sea. Such acts are unacceptable. We reiterate our full support for the investigations initiated by the national authorities of Denmark, Germany, and Sweden to determine the origin and the damage and the possible perpetrators. We welcome their joint letter of yesterday indicating that the investigation is underway, and we have full confidence in their objectiveness and comprehensiveness. The three countries that are carrying the investigation have strong judicial institutions and unquestionable records on the rule of law. Second, this is the third meeting on the issue zealously called by Russia within less than 1 month. It is obvious that such investigations processes are complex and need time, as the letter highlights. In the meantime, internet is full of all kinds of information, dis and misinformation, including colorful theories advanced by dependent and independent journalists, especially by those who have the luxury to use their freedom as they wish. We all want to see the findings, but we must be patient and wait for the ongoing investigation's conclusions. Therefore, bringing this discussion incessantly in the agenda of the Security Council equals more to a political pressure and a maneuver to divert attention from other issues. The politicization of the investigation process and the artificial pressure on it by the heated rhetoric do not help to expedite the process as we all want. Third, while we all want to know the truth on the acts of the sabotage, the obsession in singling out this one issue is both cynical and preposterous at a time when, for more than 500 days, Russia has been waging an unjustified, aggressive, and merciless war on its neighbor with devastating human and economic consequences. Today, like every year on 11th of July, we commemorate the Srebrenica genocide. The scale and depravity of this tragedy continues to burden our souls 28 years later. I mention it not only because it deserves commemoration with humbleness, but also because it happened during the last war in Europe, and we have committed to never let those tragic events repeat. And this is why I insist that when it comes to the question of war in Ukraine, there are far more important and consequential questions that need and should have our attention on a daily basis, such as the killing of more than 9,000 innocent civilians, including 500 children, the whole range of the despicable crimes committed by the Russian army, the deliberate destruction of residential areas by waves of illegally acquired Iranian kamikaze drones, the thousands of Ukrainian children forcefully deported in Russia and given for adoption, the frightening magnitude and cost of deliberate destruction of civilian infrastructure, and the decimation of economy in Ukraine. A joint assessment of the United Nations, World Bank Group, European Commission, and the government of Ukraine estimates that the cost of reconstruction and recovery in Ukraine has grown to $411 billion. The report finds that direct damages to buildings and infrastructure amounts to more than $135 billion, and the most affected areas are housing, transport, energy, commerce, and industry and agriculture, otherwise the backbone of the economy. And that was last month. The cost of war, including for Russia itself, increases every hour, every day. Therefore, and this will be my final point, instead of calling for meetings on the Nord Stream pipeline and wasting Council's time in futile politicization of an ongoing investigation process, Russia could be more useful and productive if it would put an end to the war in Ukraine and seriously engage in diplomacy by starting with the complete withdrawal of its troops from the territory of Ukraine. And I thank you.
I thank the representative of Albania for their statement, and I give the floor to the representative of China.
Mr. President,
我听取了两位通报人的通报，
listened to the
也
briefings
阅
by
读
the
了
two
丹麦、
briefers.
瑞典
Also read
德国
the-
三国代表致安理会主席的信。
the letter to the President of the Security Council
北溪管道
by
发生爆炸
Germany,
已经
Sweden,
10个月，
and Denmark. The
安理
explosion of
会
Nord
曾
Stream pipeline
通过
happened
不
nearly
同
2
形
months
式
ago. The
围绕
Security
此事
Council
进行过多
has
次
held
讨
a number
论
of，discussions on this matter in
中方
different
已全面
formats.
阐述
China
了
has
立
already
场主张。
comprehensively set out its
今天
position.
我只强调3
Today,
点：
I will only stress 3
一，
points. First,
北溪管道爆炸
the Nord
不仅
Stream
对
pipeline
跨国基础设施安
explosion
全
not
造成直
only
接威胁，
poses a direct threat to the
同
safety
时
of
还给
transnational
相关海域
infrastructure,
的
but
生态
also
环境、
has a negative
航运
impact
安
on the
全
ecological
带来
environment
负
and
面
safety of
影响。
shipping in the relevant
必须
maritime
本着对
areas.
地区安
It
全和
is
发展
essential
负
to
责的
adopt
态
an
度，
approach that is
对事件
responsible
开
for the
展
security
独
and
立、
development of the
专业的
region
调查，
in carrying out an
并
independent
确保
and
结论
professional
客观、
investigation into
公
the
正、
incident
权
and
威，
ensure that the
经得
conclusions
起
are
历史的检
objective,
验。
impartial, authoritative, and can stand the
二，
test of history.
有关
Second,
国家针对
the
北溪
countries
管道爆
concerned
炸
have
开展的
been
国别调
conducting
查，
country
已有
specific
相当
investigation
长一段
into
时
the
间，
Nord Stream pipeline
但
explosion
迟
for
迟
quite some
没
time.
有明确说法。
A clear statement, however, is yet
时
to
间拖
come
得越
after
久，
much delay.
收集
The
证据
longer
和
the
查明真
delay,
相
the more
就
difficult
越
it
难，
will be to collect
外界
evidence
的
and
质疑和
ascertain the
猜测
truth.
就
The
越
more
多，
doubts and
调
speculations
查结果的
and
可
the
信
less
度
credible the
也就
results
越
of the
低。
investigations will be.
中方认为，
China
回应国
believes
际社会
that
关切
the
的
best
最好
way
办
to
法，
respond to the concerns
就
of
是
the
尽
international
快公布
community
调查
is
结
to
果，
announce the results of
哪怕
investigation
只
as soon
是
as
阶段
possible,
性的进
even
展。
if it is only a milestone.
三，
Third,
北溪管道爆炸
the
发
Nord
生在
Stream
乌克兰
pipeline
危机的
explosion took
大背
place
景下。
against the backdrop
事
of
件
the
发生后，
Ukrainian
有关各
crisis,
方做出了截然不同的
and the
分
parties
析和解
concerned
读。
have made a very different analysis and
我们呼吁
interpretations
不
in
要
the
将
wake
有
up of the
关调
incident.
查
We
政治
call
化，
on all parties not to
更不要借
politicize
机进行政
investigation,
治操
still
弄。
less use it as an opportunity for
俄
political
罗斯是北
manipulation.
溪管道爆炸事件的
Russia
主要
is
当
one of
事
the
方
main
之一。
parties involved in the explosion.
任何客观
And
公正的调
any
查
objective
都
and
少不了
impartial
同俄罗
investigation
斯的沟
requires
通与合
communication
作。
and cooperation with Russia.
希望有关国家
I hope
能
that the
承认这
countries
一点，
concerned will
并采
acknowledge
取
this
相应的
and
积极
take
举措。
positive steps accordingly.
最后，我
In
要重申，
conclusion, I'd like to
中
reiterate
方呼吁就北溪管
China's
道爆
call
炸
for an
早日
early
查明真相，
clarification of the
早
facts
日将
surrounding the
肇事者
explosion
绳之
and
以法
for。the perpetrators to be brought to
支持
justice
秘
at an
书
early
处
date.
提供更
And
多有用信
as a
息，
support for
安
the
理会对
Secretary
此事
to provide
保
more
持
useful
关注。
information and the Council to remain
谢谢
seized
主
of the
席。
matter. Thank you, President.
I thank the representative of China for their statement, and I give the floor to the representative of the United States.
Thank you, Mr. President. As others have noted, this is the third time in less than a month that Russia has called for the Council to discuss Nord Stream. Russia's efforts to try to use this Council as a platform for its disinformation are as cynical as they are transparent. Bludgeoning the Council with repetitive meetings will not change the facts on the ground. As we have emphasized many times, we do not condone this attack on critical infrastructure. We remain confident in the ongoing, competent, and credible investigations underway by Germany, Sweden, and Denmark. We thank these countries for their commitment to diligent and impartial investigations into the attack and for their recent letter on this topic to the Council. Russia's unabating, unsubstantiated, so-called concerns about the transparency and impartiality of these investigations ring as hollow as its assertions that it had no relationship with the Wagner Group and had no plans to invade Ukraine. The countries directly involved should be permitted to conclude their investigations without undue pressure and specious allegations. Russia cannot and should not be allowed to prejudge or prejudice the results of these investigations prior to their conclusion. The hypocrisy is on full display. Russia claims to respect sovereignty and territorial integrity while invading its sovereign neighbor and attempting to annex its territory. Russia now disregards the jurisdiction of competent national authorities, carrying out and concluding investigations within their exclusive economic zones. Russia also claims to want an impartial investigation as long as that investigation upholds Russia's spurious accusations that the United States was behind the attacks. We again categorically refute any allegations that the United States bears any culpability for these attacks. As Russia continues its theatrical hand-wringing and selective concern regarding the protection of critical infrastructure, it is razing entire cities with relentless attacks against Ukraine. It is importing UAVs from Iran in flagrant violation of UN Security Council 2231 and deploying them in attacks that kill civilians in Ukraine. Russia's agenda here is simple. It is to overwhelm this council with meetings on Nord Stream, undermine ongoing investigations, and distract from its ceaseless attacks against Ukraine's power stations, hospitals, schools, and apartment buildings. Ongoing national investigations must be allowed the space to carry out their work. This council should reject repeated meetings with no purpose other than to waste time, spread disinformation, and distract from the Kremlin's indefensible war of aggression against Ukraine. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of the United States for their statement, and I give the floor to the representative of Japan.
Thank you, Mr. President. I thank briefers for their briefings, and I also thank informative input in letter by Germany, Sweden, and Denmark. Mr. President, energy resources, including natural gas, are fundamental to people's lives. The global energy situation has been tense in recent years. Vandalism to critical infrastructure and facilities is an unacceptable act that will have a significant impact on countless people. Therefore, Japan is deeply concerned about the incident which happened to the Nord Stream pipelines and long-term damage and risk to the maritime environment. Mr. President, we are closely monitoring and looking forward to the progress of the ongoing national investigations by the authorities of Germany, Sweden, and Denmark. We are confident that these investigations will be conducted in a fair manner. We hope that the investigations by these states will be completed as soon as possible and that the result will be provided to the Security Council. It will be a task of the Security Council to address any matter that concerns the peace and stability of the international community. But we don't want to go for speculation without any subjective information. Any objective information. The Security Council should, however, wait for the national authorities to conclude their works. I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of Japan for their statement. I shall now make a statement in my capacity as a representative of the United Kingdom. Colleagues, the UK condemns acts of sabotage on critical national infrastructure. We should treat the sabotage of the Nord Stream pipeline with utmost seriousness. The international community is concerned about this act and wants clear answers about what happened and who was responsible. As we've said before, the best way to get those answers is to support the impartial investigations of Denmark, Sweden and Germany, and to respect those processes. We do not believe it is good use of our time for the Security Council to start to prejudge the outcome of these investigations, dictate how they are conducted, or otherwise undermine them. We welcome the latest update sent by Germany on behalf of Denmark and Sweden and their commitment to updating the Security Council. Their letter underlines the complexity of the ongoing investigations and underscores that this process will take time. We are confident that when these investigations conclude, their findings will be authoritative. We and fellow Council members should continue to offer our full support to these investigations so that we can establish who was responsible for these acts. Finally, we must note Russia's inconsistent attitude towards civilian infrastructure. They claim outrage here, but are pursuing a systematic campaign to target civilian infrastructure in their war of aggression against Ukraine, killing thousands of civilians in the process. Such hypocrisy should not surprise us, but it makes it hard to take anything the Russians say on this subject at face value. I resume my function as President of the Council. The representative of the Russian Federation has asked for the floor to make a further statement. I give them the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. Because we spoke at the very beginning, I'll allow myself a few comments. First of all, I wanted to ask the representative of the U.S. to clarify something. You said that affected states, if I recall correctly, have the right and must participate in this investigation. Do you consider the Russian Federation to be an affected state, the state to which that pipeline belonged to, or do you believe only the states on the coast to be part of this group of affected states? I'd like to believe that affected states does include the Russian Federation, otherwise it would simply be illogical, and therefore we trust and count on your support so that our experts can join the ongoing investigation, and we have much more justifications for this now. And another comment, I noticed that today's statements, which many of our Western colleagues dedicated almost entirely to the Ukrainian crisis, allow us to clearly trace the chain of causality which guided those who committed these crimes, as well as those that are covering up for it and continuing to cover up. And I thank you for that, because this alone made today's meeting worth it. I'm convinced that this is excellent material for a Russian and future international investigation, and I'm sure that the record of today's meeting fully deserves to be one of the key documents at the initial stages, at the very least. Thank you.
I thank the representative of the Russian Federation for their statement. There are no more names inscribed on the list of speakers. The meeting is adjourned.